I'm Jessa Nicholson Goetz. I suppose my title would be attorney. I'm a privately practicing attorney in Madison, Wisconsin. At least my office is based there. I practice statewide. I practice in the fields of criminal defense and family law.
Thank you. And it's family law that has us talking about this play, Spring Cleaning. I don't suppose you'd heard of it before I brought it to your attention?
I had not, and I am reading through it, and I am enjoying it so far. So,
yeah, when we do older theater, and sometimes it doesn't have to be even that old, as we'll get into here, sometimes the stakes aren't as clear. And, here we've got a play here. It's not even 100 years old, but the husband Richard is making these proclamations, and it's like, oh no, at this time in England, women were not guaranteed the right to petition for divorce. She literally, has to toe the line here. Can you give us kind of a brief, tidy history of just how much divorce in, say, Western countries has changed over the past few decades?
Oh, and it's changed wildly. I mean, it's funny looking at this, like this setup. I don't know how familiar you are with the life of George Eliot, but I was having like flashes to that because her husband had her longtime partner had a wife that was mentally ill, that then he moved them in and moved her into the attic. And there was like some allegation of prostitution. That's a total aside, but no, I mean, it's changed. Things have changed quite a bit. I mean, we still at the office get phone calls all the time asking, well, my spouse had an affair. Isn't that grounds for a divorce? And I mean, we've had no fault divorce in every state in the country for like 40 years. People don't even realize that.
Yeah. How does that differ from a setup like Spring Cleaning?
Well, so, all right, just a brief history of family law. I'll try not to go too long here, but it used to be that you had to state cause because we didn't let people get divorced as freely and as easily. And I could probably give you some reasons in my view that that's true, but you don't need my politicizing on that. The reality is we just did not grant them as easily. And so usually people had to show certain things. One thing was that infidelity. One thing was that the marriage was never consummated, as outdated as that is. And there were other grounds. I think imbecility or alcoholism could be proven as a ground for divorce. Gradually, we as society sort of modernized. We decided that perhaps we don't need to ask people to explain the reasons, but rather it's sufficient to have them swear under oath that the marriage is broken irreconcilably. And so that's what we do now. But when you did have to cause fault in a divorce or identify fault in a divorce, I can see how that idea could lead to hijinks akin to spring cleaning.
As an individual and as a professional, what we've lost in the potential for drama and adventure, have we gained in fairness? That it's certainly tougher to tell a good divorce yarn now.
I would say that we have lost palace intrigue in this process, but we have gained what I think is fundamentally a fairer and more equal and more respectful marriage, not pun intended, I guess, between granting the legal relief that someone is seeking and invading their personal privacy. I think that, we've just sort of seen, legally speaking, at least, sort of a broader separation between what happens in someone's personal, intimate life and what we bring into a courtroom when affairs of the domestic sort of abut legal contracts. Look, Wisconsin was always progressive in terms of women's rights. We were the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment. Women's rights advances and the ability to get a divorce they've changed hand in hand. As women have gotten more rights, it's become easier for women to get divorced.
But Wisconsin was fairly pioneering in having the, hey, listen, if you're going to come to court to dissolve this contract, okay, we're pretty much going to split things down the middle.
No,
and
we absolutely were. And my point was just that's pretty consistent with our kind of progressive history that way. I think that I think that we've been good on that. And I fully support these changes. Of course, just to, not to feminist soapbox this for too long, but one of the problems that used to be true is abuse was not a particularly good reason to be able to seek a divorce. And so you'd have, that's why the alcoholism thing would come in some states, is you couldn't seek a divorce because you were being physically abused, but you could if your husband was drunk. So you'd get him drunk while he physically abused you to catch him in the drunkenness so that you could get the divorce. People still, it's very rooted in popular culture because many people still walk into lawyers' offices today thinking that they need to provide that type of information. Now, look, if you are doing certain things, and let's go to this idea of alcoholism as the fault reason, right? If you have children together and someone, say, operates their vehicle with their kids in the car while they're drunk, now that's going to become relevant in a family court trial. Not to whether the divorce should be granted, but certainly as to whether that person's a safe person to have taking care of children, especially if they're intoxicated. So there are ways that we still touch on that, because if a court is asked to make a decision about custody and placement, and there's an allegation that a parent isn't fit to parent, some of that similar type of evidence could overlap, But in terms of infidelity, infidelity is never going to be a reason that someone can't be a parent.
And, in this case, we have not even necessarily even attempted infidelity. It's sort of more the guy who's pursuing her.
Right.
And, Richard comes in and on the one hand says, well, I'll keep you away from your kids. And on the other hand says, well, why don't we go to France for 6 months? No mention of bringing the kids.
Yeah, no, it's fine. We'll get that. That'll all get sorted out later.
She may or may not have destroyed his manuscript. How does that fit into a marital property estate? If Richard writes a novel and then Margaret incinerates it, how do we account for that?
Well, how much do you think his novel was worth? That would be what we'd have to do. Okay, so really, if you want to, so let's assume he has no backup. See, now I'm going to entertain your wild hypothetical here. If he has no backup and she destroyed it, number one, he could allege that there was marital waste by the destruction of this. And marital waste is anything that you do that well, it is what it sounds like. I can't spend money on gambling and claim that benefited my marriage. And so there's this limited window of 1 year where you can say, look, for the past year, he emptied all of our bank accounts because he had a cocaine addiction. And so I should get credit for that. Those are really limited situations, but this could theoretically be one, okay, where he could say, look, marital waste, she destroyed this out of spite, and it was going to be the great American novel. Then we'd probably have to get into expert testimony about whether or not this manuscript was worth very much at all. So I guess my question is, how good of a writer was he? He's done well enough that she can entertain these 10 guests in their all hours. So. That's true.
Yeah.
So, okay. But no, realistically, those sorts of things that spouses do in anger to each other, even if they do result in some sentimental losses, those typically aren't going to translate onto a marital balance sheet. It's typically not going to be something that you're able to really account for because the law can't account for broken hearts.
What Margaret would gain in flexibility if she really did want to leave the marriage, all of Richard's grand gestures come to nothing if she's like, no, I already filed the paperwork. We're going to be done in 120 days, right?
Right.
So we gain fairness, but we lose grand gestures like having Mona.
Yeah, romance is always the one that dies, right? Romance is always the victim here with fairness.
If there was a top 5 great divorce comedies, does this one rank? What else is on the list?
There are a lot of misconceptions, but not all of them are as comedic as this. I don't know that it's funny that people think they can put their kids on the stand and make their kids testify who they want to live with. That's more Kramer versus Kramer, which was decidedly not comedic.
Right.
But there are, I can definitely think of cinematic or theatrical displays of divorce that don't track our legal reality, but I don't know that any of them have been as charming.